Welcome back. You're watching Today, and the Citrus Growers Association of South Africa is calling for urgent government intervention to ensure oranges continue to be exported to the European Union. The association has written to Trade, Industry and Competition Minister Ibrahim Patel requesting that he urgently establish a World Trade Organization panel on this issue. At stake are hundreds of millions of rands that could be lost to the South African economy. The call comes after a stalemate between the South African government and the EU after Patel's department lodged a dispute at the WTO in July. Let's discuss this more. We're joined by Justin Chadwick, who's the CEO at the Citrus Growers Association of South Africa. A very good afternoon to you, Justin, and thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Let's perhaps take it back a couple of steps and start with the dispute that we are referring to in this instant that has landed us to where we are at the moment.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. It revolves around a insect called a false codling moth, which is found throughout Africa, but is not found in the European Union. After some interceptions in the EU, they imposed regulations midway through our season in 2021. These were interim measures with more stringent measures coming into play in 2023. We did lodge an objection at that time, and that we felt that our false codling moth management system was adequate. We felt that there was no technical justification or rationale for the new measures. And while the interim measures were in place, there were actually zero interceptions. So there was no reason to this year bump up the requirements and make them much harsher. And as a result, the minister did lodge a dispute with the WTO towards the end of last year.
And of course, the introduction or the change in the regulations that you've just described to us have had a financial impact on the citrus industry already. So perhaps if you could talk us through that financial implication that the industry has had to bear because of this.
So firstly, it's very unusual and is against international best practice to bring in new measures midway through a season. Normal practice is to give industries a chance to adapt to a new system, unless, of course, they have the possibility of imminent threat, which in this case wasn't the case. So they imposed the interim measures in the middle of our season in 21, and that meant that a whole lot of containers arrived in the EU and got held up at the borders, and we estimate something around 200 million rand was lost in terms of additional charges and costs of that delay in clearing the containers last year. In terms of the 23, what basically happens in short is that the pulp temperature, the temperature of the fruit inside, has to be cooled down to even lower temperatures. And that requires a lot more cooling capacity, what we call forced air cooling. And basically we don't have that sort of capacity in South Africa. So what that means is we would probably send 20 to 30% less oranges into the EU, which would have a cost of about 500 million rand for the industry in 23. And to put the new facilities in place and the capacity in place to do the cooling would cost somewhere in the order of 1.4 billion. So unfortunately, money that the industry just cannot afford. We're going through pretty hard times now, I think, like a lot of the agricultural sector. And so we're really in survival mode. And to have these additional unnecessary costs added to our business at the moment will mean that many won't survive.
And of course, it does mean that if you don't get that investment of 1.4 billion rand to upgrade or to change the storage units that currently exist, those 140,000 jobs that currently exist within the sector may be impacted, because ultimately the pressure will increase on the farmers.
Yes, so in terms of employment in the industry, the vast number of workers are in the field doing the harvesting, and there's only one way to harvest citrus, and that's by hand. So that means we are very labor intensive. And then the other big labor usage is in the pack houses themselves, in other words, packing the fruit into the boxes. So if we do reduce our orange exports into the EU, which take almost 40% of our oranges, it will impact on our employment in the sector.
Mm-hmm. Now, the season is set to kick off around May. And are you confident that between now and then some form of favourable resolution will be found by yourselves as an association in conjunction with the ministry?
Yeah, our appeal to Minister Patel and Minister Didiza to call for a panel is because at the moment we're in what's called a consultation. Year when Minister Patel filed with the WTO. And it is clear from the consultation phase that the European Union is not interested in coming to any sort of resolution that will be acceptable to South Africa. And so we're hoping now that that the minister applies more pressure by calling for a panel, which is the next phase in the process if a consultation fails, and maybe by calling for a panel. We will then see the EU coming to the table and seeking a resolution that makes sense to all. So we are hopeful. Obviously, the big problem is that in the EU they would have to change their laws, etc. So it's not as if you suddenly one day you can decide that you're going to change it back to the interim measures, and that I understand can take something up to 3 months. So we need drastic action right now.
Thank you very much, Justin, for those insights. That is the CEO of the Citrus Growers Association, Justin Chadwick, joining us this afternoon to speak about those regulatory concerns that have come into play and the pressure they will add to the citrus growers of South Africa.